The first time I saw Karen marching up my driveway, I knew something was off. It was a scorching summer afternoon, and I had just finished putting up the brand new gate on my property. I'd lived in this neighborhood for years, and my land had always been open, until now. The truth was, I had to close it off. People had been treating my land like a public shortcut, cutting through my backyard, leaving trash, and even parking on my grass like it was some free-for-all. Enough was enough. So, I built a sturdy metal gate, installed security cameras, and posted a private property and no trespassing sign. I figured that was the end of it. I was dead wrong. Karen, a woman in her late 50s with an over-bleached bob and the entitlement of royalty, came storming toward me. Her flip-flops smacked the pavement like tiny whips, her oversized sunglasses reflecting the bright sun. Her mouth twisted in an expression of pure offense, as if I had personally insulted her existence by daring to put up a gate on my own land. She didn't start with a hello. She started with a demand. "You need to take that gate down now." I blinked. "Excuse me." Karen pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the no trespassing sign. "This is illegal. You can't just close off public access." I stared at her, baffled. "Ma'am, this is my property. This isn't public land." "Oh, but it is," she snapped, crossing her arms. "I've walked through here for years. My kids played here. I take my dog through here every morning. You can't just suddenly decide to close it." I sighed, already sensing this wasn't going to end well. It's never been public. People just started using it because there was no fence. But this is private land, and I have every right to close it off. Karen's face turned red. She took a deep breath, like she was about to unleash a hurricane of entitlement, then jabbed a finger in my face. "Listen, buddy, I pay my HOA fees. I have rights." I almost laughed. This land isn't even part of the HOA. Her jaw dropped like a broken puppet's. Silence. For a brief moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd accept reality. But nope. Her face contorted into pure rage. "Oh, you're going to regret this." Then, without another word, she pulled out her phone. I watched, half amused, half horrified, as she punched in 3 numbers. 911. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "Hello? Yes, I need the police immediately," she practically shrieked into the phone. "This man is blocking a public walkway. He's illegally restricting access, and I feel threatened." I took a step back, stunned. Was she serious? She turned to me with a victorious smirk, whispering, "Hope you like legal trouble." And that's when I heard the sirens. The distant wail of sirens grew louder as I stood frozen in disbelief. Was this really happening? Did Karen just call 911 over a gate? My mind raced with a mix of confusion and irritation, but one thing was clear. This woman wasn't backing down. Karen, on the other hand, stood tall with her arms crossed, a smug smile curling on her lips. She glanced over at me like she had already won. In her world, calling the cops was the ultimate power move, a way to put me in my place. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. I had nothing to hide. The land was mine, free and clear. I had every legal right to put up that gate, and no amount of Karen-level entitlement could change that. Within minutes, a police cruiser rolled up, the tires crunching against the gravel. 2 officers stepped out. One was tall and broad-shouldered with a serious expression, while the other was shorter, younger, and visibly less thrilled to be there. As soon as they approached, Karen practically lunged toward them. "Oh, thank goodness you're here," she cried, pointing an accusing finger at me. "This man is blocking a public walkway. I walk through here every day, and now he's threatening me by putting up this illegal gate." The tall officer, his badge read Officer Ramirez, held up a hand to stop her rambling. "Ma'am, calm down. We'll figure out what's going on." He turned to me. "Sir, can you explain the situation?" I nodded, keeping my voice even. "Of course, officer. This is my property." I gestured toward the gate. I recently installed it because people were cutting through my land without permission. I have the deed and property lines clearly marked. It's private property, not a public walkway. The shorter officer, Officer Green, raised an eyebrow. "Do you have any paperwork to prove that?" I was ready for this. I pulled out a folder I had prepared after the gate went up. Inside was a copy of my property deed, complete with the official map showing the exact boundary lines. I handed it over, and Officer Ramirez examined it closely. Meanwhile, Karen was still fuming, her lips twitching with barely contained rage. "This is ridiculous," she huffed. "I've lived here for 15 years. If I say it's a public walkway, then it is." Officer Green looked like he was trying not to roll his eyes. "Ma'am, that's not how property laws work." Ramirez gave a small nod, handing the papers back to me. "Everything looks legitimate. You're well within your rights to put up the gate." For a second, I felt relief wash over me, until Karen snapped. "What? That can't be right," she shrieked, her voice echoing through the neighborhood. "He can't just close off access like this. Do you know how inconvenient this is? I have to walk an extra 3 blocks now." The officers exchanged a glance, clearly done with her nonsense. "Ma'am," Officer Ramirez said with a sigh, "being inconvenienced doesn't make it illegal." Karen's face turned beet red. She clenched her fists at her sides, trembling with fury. "You're supposed to protect people like me. I pay taxes. I have rights." "Your rights," Officer Green cut in, "don't include trespassing on private property." I couldn't help it, I smiled. But then, Karen did something I never expected. She pulled out her phone again, her fingers flying across the screen. Within seconds, she was snapping photos of the gate, my house, even my face. "Oh, we're going to regret this," she hissed. "I'm reporting you to the HOA, and if they don't handle you, I'll go to the county. This isn't over." I stepped forward, my patience wearing thin. "Karen, this property isn't part of the HOA. I've already told you that." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." And with that, she stomped away, but I had this sinking feeling in my gut. Something told me she wasn't done with me. And I had no idea just how far she'd go next. For a few days after the police left, everything seemed quiet. Too quiet. I wanted to believe Karen had finally accepted reality and moved on, but deep down I knew better. Women like her, they don't just give up. I wasn't wrong. It started small, almost laughable. The first sign of trouble came when I found a letter taped to my gate. The official-looking envelope was stamped with the HOA's logo in bold red ink. I didn't even bother opening it right away. I knew my property wasn't part of their jurisdiction, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was unbelievable. "Dear homeowner, we have received multiple complaints regarding an unauthorized gate blocking public access. This is a violation of HOA Policy 14.2. Please remove the gate within 10 business days to avoid fines or further legal action." I laughed out loud. The HOA? They had no authority over my land. My property wasn't part of their community. I made sure of that when I bought the place. Karen was clearly behind this. But what did she expect? That I'd roll over because of a fancy letter? I wasn't about to let her win. I called the HOA directly. After 15 minutes of hold music, a bored-sounding woman named Linda picked up. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice calm, "I received a letter about a supposed violation. But my property isn't part of the HOA. There's no legal basis for this." There was a long pause. I could almost hear Linda flipping through paperwork. "Ah, you're right," she said reluctantly. "Your property is technically outside our jurisdiction. I'll make a note of it and close the complaint." I hung up, feeling satisfied. Checkmate, Karen. Or so I thought. The next morning, things escalated. I woke up to the sound of hammering. My heart pounded as I threw on a hoodie and rushed outside, only to find 2 men in orange vests drilling holes into the ground near my gate. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted. One of them, a wiry guy with a clipboard, turned around, looking completely unfazed. "We're installing a pedestrian access point. Got an order from the HOA." I could feel my blood pressure spike. "This isn't HOA property. You can't just do this." He shrugged. "Take it up with them." I didn't waste time. I whipped out my phone and started recording. "You're trespassing," I said loud enough to be clear on the video. "This is private property, and I didn't authorize this. You need to leave now." The moment I mentioned trespassing, the workers froze. The clipboard guy muttered something under his breath before signaling to his partner to stop. They packed up and left, but the damage was done. That's when I realized Karen wasn't playing fair. I spent the rest of the day reviewing property laws and printing every document I could find. If Karen wanted a war, fine. I was ready. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. Because 2 days later, I came home to find my gate wide open and a moving truck pulling into my driveway. And at the center of it all, Karen. She stood there, clipboard in hand, barking orders at the movers like she owned the place. I stormed over, trying to keep my cool. Karen, what do you think you're doing? She didn't even flinch. Oh, good. You're here, she said in that sickly sweet tone. The HOA approved this space for community storage. We're just reclaiming what's ours. I couldn't believe the audacity. This isn't HOA property. My voice trembled with anger. But Karen? She just smiled. I filed a community easement request, she said triumphantly. The county's reviewing it right now. Until then, this land's ours to use. My blood ran cold. If the county approved her request, she could turn my property into a public access point. And if I thought this was as bad as it could get, I was dead wrong. Because the next thing I knew, Karen called the police again. And this time, she wasn't just trying to intimidate me. She was trying to get me arrested. I barely had time to process the chaos unfolding in my own driveway before the sound of sirens pierced the air. My stomach dropped. Not again. A black and white patrol car rolled up, and out stepped Officer Reynolds, the same officer who had dealt with Karen's nonsense last time. Only this time, his expression wasn't as patient. He looked tired, like he already knew the storm brewing between us was about to get worse. Karen, ever the actress, rushed toward him with crocodile tears already glistening in her eyes. "Officer," she gasped, pointing a trembling finger at me. "I'm so glad you're here. This woman is harassing our workers and preventing the HOA from accessing community property." I blinked in disbelief. "Are you kidding me?" I said, raising my hands. "This is my property, not the HOA's. I already called the county and confirmed there's no legal easement." Karen cut me off with a dramatic gasp. "She threatened me," she cried. "I'm scared for my safety." My jaw clenched. This woman was out of her mind. Officer Reynolds sighed and turned toward me. "Ma'am, is that true? Did you threaten her or the workers?" I was fuming, but I knew better than to lose my temper. "No, officer. In fact," I pulled out my phone. I recorded everything. The only thing I did was tell them they were trespassing. I handed him my phone, watching as his eyes scanned the video. Karen stood off to the side, wringing her hands dramatically as if she were the victim of some heinous crime. But with every second the officer watched, her fake concern began to crumble. When he finished, Officer Reynolds handed my phone back and turned toward Karen, his jaw tight. "Ma'am, this video shows no threats, just you and your team trespassing. And unless you have a valid court order, you have no right to touch this property." For once, Karen was speechless. But the HOA guidelines," she stammered. "The HOA has no jurisdiction here," he snapped, clearly at the end of his patience. "If you or your workers set foot on this property again without legal authority, you could face trespassing charges." Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It was glorious to watch her crumble under the weight of her own lies. "You can't, this isn't over," she finally spat, turning on her heel and storming back toward her house. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate it." He nodded, but his expression was serious. "If she keeps harassing you, file a restraining order. I'll document everything today, but don't hesitate to protect yourself legally." I promised I would. And when he left, the silence felt heavier, like the storm wasn't over, just building. But Karen? She wasn't backing down. The next morning, I found a new surprise waiting for me. A huge public access point sign had been hammered right outside my property line. And underneath it, a petition with Karen's name plastered all over it, circulating through the neighborhood, demanding the county grant her an easement. And if she succeeded, I'd lose everything. But if Karen thought I was going down without a fight, she was dead wrong. What happens when the county gets involved? I woke up the next morning to find another surprise waiting for me, this time in my mailbox. A thick, official-looking envelope from the county zoning office. My heart pounded as I tore it open, my fingers shaking slightly. Inside was a notice informing me that the HOA, Karen, had officially petitioned for a public easement across my property. And worse, there was a hearing scheduled in 2 weeks where I would have to defend my rights or risk losing the battle entirely. I couldn't believe the lengths this woman was willing to go. Karen wasn't just content with trespassing. She wanted the law on her side. Fury bubbled beneath my skin, but I knew rage alone wouldn't win this fight. I needed proof, solid, undeniable evidence that this land was mine and the HOA had zero claim to it. I spent the next several days digging through every document I had. Property deeds, old survey maps, HOA guidelines, everything. I even visited the county archives, where a kind clerk helped me unearth records dating back over 50 years. And that's when I found it. A gold mine. Tucked away in the records was an original property plat, one that clearly showed my lot was private property with no easements ever granted. The HOA's borders ended 3 feet before my driveway even began. I had them. 2 weeks later, I arrived at the county zoning office dressed to win. I wasn't playing around. This wasn't just about a driveway. It was about my home. And if Karen thought she could bulldoze over my life, she was about to get a serious wake-up call. The hearing room was small but tense. Karen sat across from me, wearing a crisp blazer and a smug expression. I wasn't surprised to see a few of her HOA cronies whispering behind her, casting me dirty looks like I was the villain. The county commissioner cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. We're here today to review the HOA's petition for public access through private property. Let's hear from the petitioner first. Karen stood, smoothing down her blazer like she was presenting a slam dunk case. "Thank you, Commissioner," she began sweetly, but there was venom beneath her words. "As you know, our HOA maintains the community's integrity and accessibility. Unfortunately, one homeowner," she cast a pointed glance at me, "has selfishly blocked what should be a public access point." I nearly laughed out loud. Selfishly? This woman wanted to turn my land into a community walkway. And I was the selfish one? She continued, laying out a fabricated history of the HOA's supposed right to the space. It was a pretty performance, I had to admit. But when the commissioner turned to me, I was ready. I stood, holding up the original property plat for everyone to see. "With all due respect, Commissioner, this isn't about community access. It's about a personal vendetta." I met Karen's glare head-on. "This document proves that my property has never been subject to an easement. The HOA has no legal claim here, and the county records confirm it." I handed copies to the panel, watching as their expressions shifted. Doubt, curiosity, even a flicker of annoyance toward Karen. "And that's not all," I added, my voice unwavering. "I also have a statement from the previous homeowner affirming the same thing. The HOA's attempt to seize my property is not only invalid, it's a deliberate misuse of their authority." Karen's face paled. For the first time, her confidence cracked. The commissioner flipped through the records, his brow furrowed. After several agonizing minutes, he finally looked up. "Based on the evidence presented, the HOA's petition for public access is denied." I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I won. Karen shot up from her chair, her voice sharp. "This isn't fair. She's lying. There has to be some mistake." But the commissioner's tone was final. "The records are clear, Ms. Harding. Unless you have new evidence, this case is closed." With that, the hearing was over. Karen stormed out, her heels clicking against the tile floor like gunshots. But as far as I was concerned, the sound was victory. I thought this would finally put an end to her nonsense. I was wrong, because 2 days later, something far worse was waiting for me on my front lawn. And this time, Karen wasn't hiding in the shadows. She was coming for everything. Karen's next move is her boldest yet. What happens when she goes too far? I woke up 2 days after the hearing expecting peace. Instead, I got war. The moment I stepped outside, my stomach dropped. My entire front yard was covered in bright red spray paint. The words "community property" were plastered across my driveway in massive letters, with arrows pointing toward my house. My fence had been ripped down, and a bulldozer was parked at the edge of my property. Karen stood beside it, arms crossed, watching me like she was waiting for a reaction. And behind her, a group of construction workers, looking uneasy as they prepped to start digging. I felt my blood boil. "What the hell is this?" I shouted, storming toward her. Karen smirked. "Oh, good morning." I figured since the county made such a big mistake, I'd go ahead and fix the problem myself. She gestured toward the bulldozer like it was some grand solution. "You can't do this," I snapped, pulling out my phone. "The county ruled against you. You have no legal right to this land." Karen sighed dramatically, waving a piece of paper in my face. "Actually, I do." I snatched it and skimmed the words. It was fake. Some phony document that had nothing to do with county law. It was just a bogus HOA order trying to assert control where it had none. I held it up. "This means nothing, Karen. You're trespassing, and I'm calling the cops." The second I said it, her face twitched. "Don't be ridiculous," she huffed. "The police won't do anything. This is HOA business. It's best if you just accept it." I shook my head, already dialing 911. "We'll see about that." The final call. Minutes later, the cavalry arrived. 3 squad cars pulled up, lights flashing, and Officer Reynolds stepped out, this time with a serious expression. Karen immediately put on her fake tears, but I wasn't worried, because this time, I had her dead to rights. I showed the officers the county ruling, the fake HOA document, and most importantly, the spray-painted vandalism all over my property. Karen, realizing she was screwed, tried to backpedal. I was just enforcing community guidelines. Officer Reynolds wasn't having it. He turned to the construction crew. "Pack up your equipment. This is illegal trespassing." Then he turned to Karen. "Ma'am, you're under arrest." Her face went white. "For what?" she shrieked. "Vandalism, harassment, and destruction of private property." The moment the cuffs clicked around her wrists, I swear, I had never felt such satisfaction in my life. Karen screamed and thrashed, but there was nothing she could do. The HOA had lost, and she was finally facing consequences. As she was shoved into the back of the police car, she locked eyes with me. Pure hatred. "This isn't over," she shrieked. "I'll sue you. I'll—" Slam. The car door shut, and just like that, it was finally over. I turned back to my property, still a mess from her destruction. But you know what? I smiled, because unlike Karen, I could rebuild. And she was finally getting what she deserved.